From stats that do absolutely nothing to mechanics, the game never tells you exist. These are the hidden systems Dark Souls refused to explain, and some of them completely break PvP. Dark Souls 1. The original game shipped with poise displayed in your stats menu, but here's what they didn't tell you. Poise is active at all times, including while standing still. Every player thought poise was passive armor against staggers. Wrong. Poise matters whenever you take hits that could stagger you. The game checks if incoming poise damage exceeds your current poise value on any hit. If it does, you stagger mid-swing. If not, you trade hits. This is why Havel monsters could walk through your attacks, not because they had passive super armor, but because 76 poise during a great hammer swing beats almost any single hit's poise damage. The breakpoints matter more than the stat itself. 53 poise lets you tank one-handed R1s from straight swords. 61 handles two-handed attacks from the same weapons. 76 is god tier. You can trade with ultra great swords and win because their poise damage caps around 70. But here's the part that broke PvP. Poise regenerates on a hidden 3-second timer. Every time you take a hit, that timer resets. Get hit twice within 3 seconds and your poise doesn't recover between swings. Chain attacks bypass poise entirely if timed right, which is why backstab fishing became the meta. The game never explained any of this. Players figured it out by testing thousands of weapon combinations against different armor setups, then data miners confirmed the exact values years later. Then there's the soft humanity system, and this one's layered enough to deserve its own degree program. That number in the top left corner, your held humanity before you use it at bonfires, affects 4 different stats simultaneously. Physical defense increases up to 20 points at 30 humanity, with diminishing returns after that. Item discovery jumps from 110 base to 410 at 99 humanity, making rare drops farmable. Curse resistance gets a massive hidden bonus that stacks with gear. And chaos weapons, any weapon upgraded down the chaos path scale damage with the first 10 soft humanity you're holding. Use 11 or more in the scaling caps. Use 0 and your chaos blade hits like a wet noodle. Nobody explained this. The game shows the humanity counter. It doesn't tell you that dying makes you lose it all, or that popping humanity items adds to the counter without requiring a bonfire, or that the Chaos Servant Covenant shortcut requires 30 humanity offered to a specific NPC most players never find. The entire system is a layered risk-reward economy, where holding humanity makes you stronger, but also makes you a juicier invasion target. And if you die before recovering your bloodstain, all that held humanity evaporates. Thousands of players beat the game without knowing humanity did anything beyond enabling co-op. But soft humanity at least appears on screen. Let's talk equipment load and roll types, because From Software hid the exact thresholds for years. Under 25% equipment load gives you the fast roll 13 invincibility frames, longest distance, fastest recovery. 25-50% is the mid-roll with 9 iframes and shorter distance. Above 50%, you fat roll with functionally 0 iframes and a recovery so slow you might as well accept death. The difference between 24.9% and 25.1% equipment load is the gap between dodge mastery and getting pancaked by every boss. Players had to test this with stopwatches and frame counting tools because the game just shows a percentage bar with no labeled breakpoints. Vitality affects your max equipment load, but the scaling isn't linear. Early vitality points give huge returns. Past 40 vitality, you get diminishing gains. At 99 vitality, you hit hard caps where each point adds almost nothing. The stat soft caps apply to every stat in the game: strength, dexterity, intelligence, faith, but the game displays none of this. You'd think hitting 99 strength would make you a god. In reality, damage scaling drops so hard after 40 that those last 59 points barely matter. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe now. Players wasted hundreds of levels on stats that gave fractional benefits because From Software said, figure it out yourself. And then there's resistance, the stat so useless it became a meme. Resistance raises your defenses against poison, bleed, and curse. Sounds useful, except armor already gives massive resistance bonuses, and leveling resistance gives such tiny increments that every point is a waste compared to vitality or endurance. Data miners proved resistance scaling as busted armor pieces provide 10 times the benefit per upgrade compared to stat investment. The community spent years telling new players never level resistance, while From Software stayed silent. Even in Remastered, they didn't fix it or add tooltips, just left it there as a noob trap. Combat tech. Now we get into the truly degenerate stuff that defined PvP for a decade. Toggle escapes let you manipulate roll direction by switching weapon hand states mid-animation. Normally when you roll, the direction is locked based on your initial input, but if you toggle between one-hand and two-hand grip during the roll startup frames, the game resets directional input. This means you can roll backward, toggle mid-roll, and suddenly roll forward or sideways with no telegraph. In PvP, this was godlike bait, a backstab attempt. toggle, roll through them, and punish, prepare to die. Edition players abused this endlessly. Remastered tightened the timing windows but didn't remove it completely. Dead angling was the other PvP tech that separated legends from scrubs. Lock-on targeting makes your attacks automatically face your opponent, but if you unlock the camera and manually pivot your character about 45 degrees during a swing, the attack's hitbox extends around shields. You'd see a weapon swing past your shield angle and still take damage because the hitbox registered. It ignored shield block entirely. PTDE dead angles were borderline broken. Skilled players could land hits around 70-degree angles with long weapons. Remastered nerfed the angle tolerance heavily, but didn't kill it completely. Curved swords and halberds still have slight dead angle potential if you're frame perfect. Chain backstabs and pivot backstabs are why Dark Souls PvP has a reputation for backstab fishing. Chain backstabs involve canceling your backstab recovery animation into an immediate second backstab by positioning correctly and inputting at exact frames. The victim gets backstabbed, then stands up and gets backstabbed again before they can roll. Pivot backstabs let you spin 180 degrees during your own attack and land a backstab mid-swing if your opponent tries to punish. Both techniques abuse animation priority and position checking. Latency made this worse in PTDE. Phantom backstabs from 10 feet away were common because the netcode favored the attacker. Here's a gentler hidden mechanic. Partial parries. If you parry too early and the attack connects during your parry recovery frames, you still take reduced damage at about 70% reduction. The game doesn't riposte, but you don't eat full damage either. This is why parry spamming isn't instant death against multi-hit combos. Each blocked hit during parry frames gets partial mitigation, except the game never tells you this exists, so players assumed failed parries meant full damage and stopped trying. Roll backstabs exploit positioning during opponent attack recovery. When someone swings and misses, they have a brief recovery window where they're animation locked. If you roll through that recovery period and end your roll directly behind them, the game checks for backstab proximity during your roll's last few frames. Done correctly, you teleport into a backstab the moment your roll ends. It looks like you rolled through someone and they just got backstabbed instantly. This is Peak Souls Jank, a mechanic that feels like a bug, but is 100% intentional positioning abuse. Tumble buffing is simpler, but still hidden. Normally when you apply resin or cast a weapon buff, there's a long animation where you stand still, but if you apply the buff during a roll, the animation cancels the moment the buff activates, letting you move immediately. In duels, this saves 2-3 seconds of vulnerable standing time. Combined with quick spell swaps, you can buff mid-combat without the enemy getting a free hit. The game allows animation canceling on buffs specifically, but tells you nothing about it. Move swapping takes this further into genuine exploit territory. If you swing a weapon, then swap to a different weapon mid-animation, the new weapon keeps the old weapon's moveset for that specific attack. Example, swing a Gold Tracer R2, which has fast animation, then swap to Chaos Blade mid-swing. The Chaos Blade now completes the attack with Gold Tracer speed, but Chaos Blade damage and bleed buildup. Speedrunners use this to kill bosses with mismatched damage calculations. PvP tryhards used it to land bleed procs at impossible speeds. Remastered didn't patch it because From Software apparently thought it was funny. Multiplayer chaos. Vagrants are the rarest spawn in Dark Souls, and most players have never seen one despite hundreds of hours played. When a player drops 99 of a rare item and dies without retrieving it, the game spawns a Goodwill Vagrant that migrates to another player's world. If a player loses a bloodstain with massive humanity multiple times in the same spot, it spawns an Evil Vagrant, a red crab enemy that hits like a truck and drops humanity items. These vagrants travel between servers randomly. You can't force them to spawn. They just appear as rare environmental enemies with unique loot tables. The catch? Vagrants were so rare in PTDE that wikis debated if they existed at all until data miners confirmed it in 2012. Remastered improved vagrant spawn rates slightly with dedicated servers, but they're still absurdly uncommon. Evil Vagrants can one-shot low-level players because their damage scales with NG+ cycles of the world they spawn in. Goodwill Vagrants are harmless and drop consumables. The entire mechanic exists. To create WWTF was that moments where players see an enemy that shouldn't exist and have no explanation. Kindling bonfires grants extra Estus charges, but here's the hidden part. When you kindle a bonfire, other players resting at that same bonfire in their worlds can receive a bonus Estus charge called a mystery flask. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible. The game never explains this. You'll randomly get +1 Estus and have no idea why unless you know about the kindling resonance mechanic. This is From Software's idea of passive co-op, helping strangers who will never know you existed. Resonance rings for miracles work similarly. If multiple players cast the same miracle near each other across different worlds, the spell's effectiveness increases slightly. Cast heal in the same area where other players are casting heal in their worlds, and your HP recovery ticks higher. It's a fractional increase and totally invisible unless you're recording healing numbers, but it exists as a a background multiplayer buff that rewards coincidental cooperation. Covenants have hidden functionality beyond their stated descriptions. Gravlord's servants spread Black Phantom enemies to other players' worlds when they activate Gravlord's Sword Dance. Those players then get invaded by harder enemies with no warning and no explanation. The afflicted players can hunt down the Gravlord to remove the curse, but the game never tells them who cursed them or how to find that player. It's trolling as a game mechanic. The Dragon Covenant lets you place PvP duel signs instead of co-op summon signs. Winners get dragon scales, losers get sent home. But here's the twist. Dragon duels are supposed to be honorable 1v1s with no healing, except the game enforces none of this. You can chug Estus during dragon duels and face 0 penalties. The honor rules are entirely community-invented etiquette. From Software just handed players a duel system and let them figure out social contracts on their own. Statistical nightmares, chaos weapon scaling caps at 10 soft humanity. But here's what breaks builds. If you're holding 11 plus humanity, the scaling doesn't increase further. But if you die and lose humanity, the weapon damage drops in real time. So maintaining exactly 10 humanity is optimal, but risky, because death costs you everything. Players who didn't know the cap existed would farm 99 humanity thinking it made their Chaos Blade stronger. It didn't. They just became bigger invasion targets for marginal defense gains. Item discovery scaling is similarly nonlinear. Base discovery is 110. Gold Serpent Ring adds 200. Soft humanity adds up to 410 at 99 humanity. But the scaling isn't proportional. Going from 0 to 10 humanity gives way better returns than 50 to 60. The game shows your discovery stat, but not the diminishing returns curve, so players didn't know when to stop farming humanity for loot runs. Symbol of Avarice helmet adds discovery, but drains HP constantly, meaning you need to balance healing costs against loot gains with 0 tooltips explaining the math. Fall damage has a hidden cancel mechanic. If you roll or kick at the exact frame before landing, you take 0 fall damage, not reduced damage, 0. The timing is 2 to 2 or 3 frames before impact, frame perfect execution. Speedrunners use this to skip entire areas by jumping off cliffs and canceling lethal drops. Casual players who stumble on it think they got lucky. The game never hints that fall damage is cancelable because From Software would rather players discover it accidentally or watch speedrun videos. Headshots with bows deal 1.5x damage, but the game doesn't display critical hit indicators for ranged headshots. You'll see higher damage numbers, and never know why unless someone tells you headshots exist. Even worse, not all enemies have headshot hitboxes. Bosses with obvious heads like Iron Golem, no headshot bonus. Random hollow soldiers, full headshot multiplier. The consistency is non-existent. Binoculars enable manual spell aiming by locking your camera at specific angles. Normally spells auto-target or fire straight ahead. Equip binoculars, aim at an off-angle position, then cast your spell and it fires in that direction. This lets sorcerers snipe enemies around corners or hit targets their lock-on can't acquire. It's a complete exploit of the targeting system that speedrunners use to kill bosses from unreachable positions. The binoculars themselves seem like a useless item until you realize they break the game's targeting rules. Dark Souls 2. The sequel tried to fix Dark Souls 1's obtuse systems by adding tooltips and more visible stats. Then, it hid adaptability and agility so deep that players didn't realize why their rolls felt broken for years. Adaptability increases your agility stat. Agility determines your roll iframes, and Estus chug speed. Base agility gives you 5 to 6 iframes, which is why early game DS2 feels like you're fat rolling constantly even at 30% equipment load. You need 96 agility to match Dark Souls 1 fast rolls at 13 iframes. That requires 25 plus adaptability investment. The game never explains this. New players wonder why they're getting hit mid-roll and blame hitboxes, when the real issue is agility being too low. Even worse, attunement also raises agility as a secondary stat. So Faith and Sorcery builds accidentally get better rolls, while pure melee builds have to dedicate levels to adaptability specifically. It's the single most important stat in DS2, and the game treats it like a minor side stat with no tutorial. Power Stance was DS2's big new feature, but they hid the requirements. Hold triangle when dual-wielding weapons of the same type, and you enter Power Stance, which gives you unique L1 and L2 dual-wield attacks. But you need 1.5x the strength and dexterity requirements of the weapons you're wielding. Dual Ultra Greatswords? You need 1.5x the combined stat requirements of both weapons. The game shows the Power Stance icon when active, but never lists the stat math in menus. Backsteps have more iframes than rolls in DS2 if your agility is low. At base agility, backsteps give 6 to 7 iframes while rolls give 5. This flips at higher agility where rolls become superior. But early game, backdash dodging is technically better for avoiding attacks than rolling, and nobody knows because the game doesn't quantify dodge frames anywhere. Players just assume rolling is always optimal, like DS1. Enemy despawning is DS2's most controversial mechanic. Kill the same enemy 12 times and it stops respawning permanently. This applies to every basic enemy in the game except bosses. On one hand, it lets you clear areas for safe traversal after repeated deaths. On the other hand, It ruins soul farming and locks you out of rare enemy drops if you farm carelessly. Joining the Company of Champions Covenant disables despawning but also makes enemies harder, which the game mentions vaguely, but doesn't explain the despawn side effect clearly. Pillar poking is exclusive to Scholar of the First Sin Edition. Thrust-type weapons like spears and rapiers can attack through stone pillars in certain DLC areas, especially against the Fume Knight boss. The pillars have broken collision detection that allows thrusting hitboxes to extend through them while blocking enemy attacks. It's an unintended advantage that trivializes some DLC encounters if you know to position behind pillars. Dark Souls 3. The third game brought back poise but changed it so fundamentally that veterans didn't understand it for months. Poise in DS3 is hyper armor during specific attack animations. Light weapons get almost zero hyper armor. Heavy weapons get massive hyper armor during charged attacks and weapon arts. Your poise stat acts as a multiplier for hyper armor frames, not a passive stagger resist. 30 poise on a dagger gives you nothing. 30 poise on a great hammer lets you trade hits with almost anything. The breakpoints are weapon specific and never listed in-game. Great swords need 27 plus poise to hyper armor through straight sword combos. Ultra great swords need 40 plus to tank great sword swings. Daggers need like 200 poise to hyper armor through anything, which is mathematically impossible. So dagger users have functional 0 poise. The entire system exists to make heavy weapons viable in trades, but the game just shows a poise number with no context about weapon interactions. Ember boosts your max HP by 30% and enables multiplayer invasions and summons. But here's the catch. If you die, you lose Ember status, and that HP disappears mid-fight against the next boss. Every death in DS3 punishes you by removing 30% of your health bar for the next attempt, unless you use another Ember. It's brutal punishment for failure that compounds the difficulty of repeat attempts. And invaders can use dried fingers to force multiple invasions simultaneously, while Embered, turning PvE runs into gank squads. Status effects scale with enemy max HP in DS3, which is completely invisible. Bleed builds up over multiple hits, then procs for approximately 15% of an enemy's max HP as flat damage. This means Bleed is godlike against high HP bosses like Yorm, but useless against trash mobs. Frost works similarly, dealing percent-based damage and slowing enemies. The game never displays the formulas, or explains why status builds demolish certain bosses while struggling against others. Jump attack poise damage scales uniquely falling attacks from heights deal bonus poise damage based on fall distance. Jump off a ladder and hit someone mid-fall with a plunging attack, and you'll stagger enemies that normally can't be staggered. Speedrunners use this to interrupt boss attack patterns by baiting plunge opportunities. It's a hidden damage and stagger multiplier that requires environmental setup. The weapon skill system introduced L2 weapon arts, but they have hidden limitations. One-handing a shield blocks your weapon art. You have to two-hand your weapon or use a special parry shield to access weapon arts while shield equipped. Most players never realize shields disable weapon arts because the game doesn't lock the L2 button, it just makes it do the shield ability instead. So people think their weapon art is bugged when they're just holding a shield. Ring of Sacrifice prevents item loss on death and is recoverable from your bloodstain after dying. This makes it reusable for tough boss runs. Wear the ring, die, retrieve it from bloodstain. Repeat. The ring breaks on death, but doesn't consume permanently, so it's basically infinite death insurance if you keep recovering it. The game's tooltip implies the ring breaks forever, but that's misleading. It just needs to be picked back up. The meta consequences. These hidden mechanics created a decade of wiki dependence and community knowledge gatekeeping. New players stumbled blind while veterans hoarded information like currency. You couldn't optimize builds without external guides. You couldn't understand why you kept dying in PvP without frame data spreadsheets. From Software built a game that required the internet to function, then marketed it as a mysterious solo experience. Toggle escapes and dead angles split the community between tech is skill expression and tech is broken garbage. PvP tournaments banned certain techniques while speedrun leaderboards required them. The same mechanics enabled creativity and ruined casual invasions. Every patch that nerfed exploits sparked arguments about whether From Software was fixing bugs or killing depth. Poise reworks across the trilogy showed From Software couldn't decide if they wanted the mechanic public or hidden. DS1 hid it completely. DS2 broke it accidentally with agility. DS3 turned it into weapon-specific hyper armor, then players data mined the exact poise to hyper armor multiplier tables anyway. By Elden Ring, they gave up and added a poise bar, which feels like admitting defeat after 15 years of obfuscation. Status effects scaling in DS3 rewarded build knowledge in ways that feel almost unfair. Players who understood bleed HP percent scaling melted endgame bosses in seconds. Players who didn't wondered why their bleed build sucked. The gap between informed and uninformed players was the gap between easy mode and suffering. all because tooltips said causes bleeding with zero damage formulas. Vagrant spawning and Mystery Estus represent From Software's passive multiplayer philosophy interactions that help or hurt you without direct engagement. You'll never meet the player whose death spawned a Vagrant in your world. You'll never know whose kindling gave you extra Estus. It's altruism and chaos as environmental effects, which sounds poetic, until an evil Vagrant one-shots you in the painted world. Why it works. The hidden mechanic design shouldn't work. Every UX principle says players need clear feedback and tutorialized systems. Dark Souls ignores this, and thrives because the opacity creates discovery. Finding out poise only works. During attacks feels like secret knowledge. Learning toggle escapes feels like joining a secret club. The mechanics are hidden not because From Software is lazy, but because discovery is content. This design philosophy spread across the entire Souls-like genre. Hollow Knight hides charm interactions. Blasphemous hides guilt mechanics. Nioh hides stance-switching tech. Every Souls-like since 2011 embraced figure it out yourself as core design. Some games took it too far and became impenetrable. Others found the balance between mystery and frustration. But they all owe their design language to Dark Souls' hiding poise and watching players reverse engineer combat for a decade. The downside is accessibility. Disabled players, casual players, and people without wiki access got locked out of entire mechanics. Colorblind players couldn't see world tendency shifts. Players without stable internet missed Vagrants and co-op entirely. The get-good mentality that emerged from hidden mechanics became toxic gatekeeping where struggle equaled virtue. From Software never acknowledged this. They just kept hiding mechanics through Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring. By the time Elden Ring launched in 2022, the hidden mechanic philosophy hit its limit. Players demanded transparency after 15 years. Spirit Ashes got explicit scaling stats. Poise became a visible bar. Status buildup showed numeric values. The series evolved toward clarity while keeping mystery and lore and exploration. But the DNA is still there: jump attack tech, status scaling, weird weapon interactions. From Software just hid them slightly less. If you enjoyed this video and want to see Dark Souls' most disturbing mysteries explained, click the video on screen.